Have you ever felt like God put someone in your path right when you need them most? Michael was a successful entrepreneur who had it all, but he had just lost the only person he truly loved. He was driving aimlessly through the streets of Nashville, his heart shattered until a sweet voice singing about hope in God made him stop in his tracks. That voice belonged to Michaela, a street singer with an old guitar and a smile that seemed to light up even the darkest corners of the soul. What Michael didn't know was that this encounter would change his life forever. Stay until the end to discover how a simple song on the street became the beginning of a love that would honor God's name. Michael closed the door of his SUV and felt like he was also closing a chapter of his life. His mother's funeral had ended just 3 hours ago, but for him, it felt like 3 years of unbearable silence. The words of comfort from family and friends echoed emptily in his mind, like echoes in a cave with no exit. He had driven without thinking, without really seeing the Nashville streets he had known by heart since childhood. His hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from a void so deep it hurt to breathe. The woman who had raised him, who had sacrificed everything for him, who prayed every night that he would find a good wife who truly loved him, was gone. Michael had built a business empire. He had money, property, respect in the business world, but none of that mattered. He had now become a man without an anchor, floating in a sea of pain he didn't know how to navigate. When he finally stopped the SUV, he didn't even know where he was, only that his eyes were burning and he needed air. He got out of the vehicle and walked to a small square he had never noticed before. There were dark green painted iron benches, some leafy trees providing shade, and a silence that contrasted with the noise inside him. He collapsed onto one of the benches as if his legs could no longer bear the weight of his sadness. Michael rested his elbows on his knees and buried his face in his hands, trying to hold back the tears he had been saving since dawn. His impeccable Oxford gray suit looked flawless. His gold watch shone in the afternoon sun, but inside he felt like a building about to collapse. He remembered the last time he had hugged his mother 3 days earlier in the hospital, when she had taken his hand with fragile fingers and whispered that God had a beautiful plan for him. At that moment, he didn't understand those words, and now they seemed like a cruel reminder of how alone he was. What plan could there be in being orphaned at 32? What was the point of everything he had achieved if he had no one to share it with? Michael clenched his fists, feeling the rage and sadness mix in his chest like a storm. He had been a good son. He had worked hard. He had honored his mother with every important decision, and still God had taken her. Resentment began to creep into his pain, and for the first time in his life, Michael wondered if his mother's faith had been worth it. It was then that he heard something that pulled him out of his dark thoughts. A female voice, soft as the wind through the trees, began to sing somewhere nearby in the square. It wasn't a perfect voice. It didn't have the polish of the professional singers Michael had heard at corporate events, but it had something more valuable. It had soul. The melody was simple, accompanied only by the chords of a guitar, but the words cut through the air and went straight to his broken heart. They spoke of hope, that even in the deepest pain, God is still there, holding those who trust in him. Michael slowly lifted his head, searching for the source of that voice that seemed to speak exactly to what he was experiencing. Across the square, under the generous shade of an oak tree, he saw a young woman sitting on a bench with a guitar in her hands. She wore a simple mustard-colored dress that moved with the breeze, and her long dark hair fell over her shoulders as she sang with her eyes closed. There was something about her in the way she surrendered to each note that made Michael forget his own suffering for a moment. The song's lyrics continued, and Michael found that the tears he had been holding back finally began to roll down his cheeks. "Though you walk through the darkest valley, do not fear, for he is with you," the young woman sang. And every word seemed designed specifically for him. Michael didn't know if he believed in those promises. He didn't know if God was really there, as his mother had said, but something in that song made him want to believe. For the first time since he had received the news that his mother was seriously ill, he felt he could breathe a little deeper. The young woman opened her eyes at the end of the song, and her gaze met Michael's across the square. For a second, that seemed to last an eternity, something passed between them, a silent connection that neither could explain. She didn't look away, nor did he. And in that instant, Michael understood that maybe, just maybe, this meeting was no coincidence. The young woman gave him a small but genuine smile, as if she understood exactly what he was going through. Then she lowered her gaze to her guitar. Michael wiped his tears with the back of his hand, feeling strangely exposed, but also relieved. He sat on that bench for what seemed like an eternity, listening to the young woman sing 2 more songs. Each one spoke of faith, of overcoming adversity, of finding light in the midst of darkness. And Michael absorbed them like a desert absorbs rain. When she finally put her guitar in a worn case and stood up, Michael felt an inexplicable urge not to let her go without saying something. He stood up from the bench, his heart beating faster, but his feet remained glued to the ground. What would he say? How could he explain that her voice had been the only thing that had managed to calm the hurricane inside his chest? The young woman began to walk towards the exit of the square, carrying her guitar on her shoulder and a small cloth bag slung across her chest. Michael took a step forward, then another, but the words wouldn't come out of his mouth. She paused for a moment, as if she felt his gaze, and turned to look at him one more time. Her warm brown eyes, full of a peace Michael hadn't seen in a long time, studied him for a second, before she nodded slightly and continued on her way. Michael stood there, watching her disappear into the streets, not knowing that he had just met the woman who would change his destiny. Michael returned to the square the next day without even questioning why. He had woken up thinking about that voice, about those songs that spoke of hope when he had none. He had spent the whole night tossing and turning in his bed, reliving the funeral, hearing his mother's last words in his mind, but also remembering the strange peace he had felt listening to that young woman sing. It was 3 p.m. when he parked his SUV in the same spot as the day before. He got out wearing the same Oxford gray dress pants and a white long-sleeved shirt, trying to look presentable, even though he still felt broken inside. He walked towards the square with a racing heart, fearing she wouldn't be there, that this encounter had been a unique moment that would never be repeated. But when he arrived there, she was on the same bench under the oak tree, patiently tuning her guitar. Michael felt such a wave of relief that he had to stop for a moment to catch his breath. He didn't know what he was doing there. He didn't know what he hoped to achieve. He only knew that he needed to hear her again. He sat on the same bench where he had cried the day before, keeping his distance, but with his eyes fixed on her. The young woman today wore a sand-colored dress that reached her knees and simple brown sandals. Her hair was gathered in a loose braid that fell over her right shoulder. And when she began to sing, Michael once again felt that inexplicable peace that had moved him so much. This time the song was different, more joyful. It spoke of thanking God for each new day, for every chance to start over. Michael closed his eyes and let the words envelop him, imagining his mother was there with him, smiling to see that her son had found a moment of calm. When the song ended, some passers-by applauded and left a few coins in the open guitar case the young woman had at her feet. She thanked each person with a sincere smile, regardless of whether they left much or little. Michael watched everything from his bench, fascinated by the humility and grace with which she carried herself. There was something genuine about her, something he hadn't seen in the people of his social circle, where everything seemed measured and calculated. After 3 more songs, the young woman paused to drink water from a bottle. It was in that moment that her eyes met Michael's again. This time she didn't look away, but tilted her head slightly, as if wondering who this man in a suit was, who had been watching her sing for 2 days. Michael felt he had to do something, say something, but his throat was dry, and the words refused to come out. To his surprise, it was she who stood up and began to walk towards him with calm steps. Michael tensed, not knowing what to expect, but when she reached his bench, what he saw in her face was not mistrust, but compassion. "Good afternoon," she said in a soft voice, and Michael noticed she had a small mole near her upper lip that made her smile even more charming. "Good afternoon," he replied, his voice sounding hoarser than he expected. The young woman stood in front of him, studying him with those brown eyes that seemed to see beyond his successful entrepreneur facade. "I saw you here yesterday," she continued, "and I saw you crying. You came back today, and although you're not crying, I can see you're still carrying something very heavy." Michael swallowed, surprised by this stranger's perception. No one else had noticed his pain, or if they had preferred to ignore it. "I lost my mother 4 days ago," Michael confessed, not knowing why he was telling this to a complete stranger. Maybe it was because she didn't know him, didn't know who he was in the business world, had no expectations about how he should behave. "I'm so sorry," she replied, with genuine empathy. "Losing someone you love it's like having a piece of your soul ripped out." There was something in the way she said it that let Michael know she truly understood what he was talking about. They weren't empty words of courtesy, but the testimony of someone who had also known that pain. The young woman sat next to him on the bench without asking permission, leaving a respectful space between them. From her cloth bag, she took out a small thermos and 2 plastic cups. "I know we don't know each other," she said, as she poured steaming coffee into one of the cups. "But sometimes a hot coffee helps more than 1,000 words." She handed the cup to Michael, who took it with trembling hands, moved by this simple but deeply human gesture. The aroma of coffee with a hint of cinnamon filled the space between them, creating an unexpected intimacy. Michael took a sip and felt the hot liquid go down his throat, awakening something inside him that had been dormant. "Thank you," he murmured. And this time he wasn't just thanking her for the coffee. They sat in silence for several minutes, drinking coffee and watching the square. Michael noticed how some children were playing near the fountain, how an elderly couple walked hand in hand, how life went on even though for him it had stopped. "My name is Michaela," she finally said, breaking the silence. "Michael," he replied, and for the first time in days, he managed something resembling a smile. "Your songs are beautiful, Michaela. Yesterday when I heard you was the first time I felt I could breathe since—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. Michaela nodded with understanding and placed her hand gently on Michael's shoulder in a motherly gesture. "Music has that power," she explained. "My dad used to say that when words are not enough, God speaks to us through melodies." Michael felt a lump in his throat, hearing that, remembering how his mother also firmly believed that God communicated in mysterious ways. Michaela removed her hand and refilled their coffee cups. And Michael found that he didn't want this moment to end. For the first time since the funeral, he didn't feel completely alone. There was something about Michaela's presence that made him feel that maybe, just maybe, he could find a reason to keep going. Michael returned to the square on the third day, and then the fourth and the fifth. What had started as an inexplicable impulse became a necessity. Every afternoon, after finishing his business meetings, he would drive to that small corner of Nashville where Michaela sang under the oak tree. He no longer sat on the distant bench, pretending to be just another passerby. Now he went directly to the bench in front of her, and Michaela would greet him with that warm smile that seemed to say, "I was waiting for you," without uttering a single word. They shared coffee from her thermos. Sometimes they exchanged a few sentences between songs. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence. Michael discovered that this shared silence was more healing than any expensive therapy his business colleagues had recommended. In the square, he wasn't the owner of a successful construction company. He didn't have to pretend to be strong. He didn't have to meet expectations. He was simply Michael, a man trying to find meaning in his life after losing the person he loved most. And Michaela never demanded he be anything more than that. One midweek afternoon, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Michael arrived earlier than usual. Michaela was putting her guitar in its case when she saw him approaching. "You finished early," she observed, and there was a genuine joy in her voice that made Michael's heart beat a little faster. "I canceled a meeting," he admitted, surprising himself. He never canceled meetings. His entire life revolved around work, but lately the hours in the office felt empty compared to the moments in that square. "You canceled a meeting to come listen to a street singer?" Michaela asked with a mischievous smile. "You're not just a street singer," Michael replied seriously. You're someone who is helping me remember how to keep living." The words came out before he could stop them, raw and honest. Michaela looked at him with those eyes that seemed to understand everything without needing long explanations. "Walk with me," she said. And for the first time since they met, they left the square together. They walked through the downtown streets of Nashville as the sunset unfolded over the city. Michael noticed things he had never seen before. The smell of barbecue smoke coming from a food truck, the sound of children's laughter from an improvised game, the warmth of people greeting each other on street corners. He had lived in this city his whole life, but always from the window of his air-conditioned SUV, from one corporate building to another. Michaela took him to a small BBQ joint. She frequented a humble place with plastic tables and walls decorated with old photographs of Nashville. "They make the best pulled pork sandwiches in the city here," she assured him as they sat down. Michael, who was used to elegant restaurants and business dinners in exclusive places, found that she was right. The food was simple but delicious, prepared with love, and served with genuine smiles. As they ate, Michaela told him about her day, about a little boy who had left $1 in her case, along with a drawing about an elderly woman who always stopped to listen, and told her that her voice reminded her of her deceased daughter. Michael listened fascinated, realizing that Michaela's world was full of real human connections, something he had lost on his rise to success. "I want you to know something," Michael said after a long silence, wiping his hands with a paper napkin. "I haven't been completely honest with you about who I am." Michaela looked at him with curiosity, but without judgment, waiting for him to continue. "I'm an entrepreneur. I have a large construction company with many employees and important projects. I have money properties, everything that's supposed to make a person happy." He paused, searching for the right words. "But when my mom died, I realized that none of that mattered. I worked so hard, built so much, and in the end I was alone. I had no one to share my success with, no one who really knew me beyond my business." His voice cracked slightly. My mom always told me that God had a good wife prepared for me, someone who would love me for who I am and not for what I have. She prayed for that until her last day, but I never paid attention. I was too busy building an empire that now feels like an empty prison. Michael looked up to see Michaela's reaction, fearing he would find pity, or worse, sudden interest now that she knew he had money. But what he saw in Michaela's eyes was only understanding and tenderness. "Thank you for trusting me," she said softly. "And just so you know, I already knew." Michael blinked in surprise. "You knew?" Michaela nodded with a small smile. "Michael, you arrive in a late-model SUV. You wear expensive watches. Your shirts are designer. You don't have to be a detective to notice you have money." She paused. "But that never mattered to me. From the first day, all I saw was a man with a broken heart who needed a little comfort. Money doesn't heal pain, Michael. Believe me, I know." There was something in the way she said it that told Michael she also had her own story of loss. "You too?" he started to ask, but Michaela interrupted him gently. "We all carry something, Michael. We all have battles that others don't see. The important thing is to find someone who is willing to stand by your side while you fight them." She extended her hand across the table, and Michael took it without hesitation. The warmth of her skin against his reminded him that he was still alive, that he could still feel something beyond the pain. At that moment in that humble BBQ joint in downtown Nashville, Michael knew that Michaela was different from anyone he had ever met. The days turned into weeks, and the afternoons in the square became the center of Michael's life. His partners began to notice his change, how he now left the office at exactly 3 p.m., no matter what meeting was on the agenda. "You look different," his accountant commented one Friday morning. "Lighter, as if a weight has been lifted off your shoulders." Michael smiled, but offered no explanation. He didn't know how to put into words what Michaela represented to him. It wasn't just that he enjoyed listening to her sing or that he liked talking to her. It was something deeper, as if his soul had been waiting his whole life to find her. Every afternoon, he discovered something new about her, how she frowned when she tuned her guitar, how she closed her eyes when she hit the high notes, how her laugh sounded like music itself. Michael was falling in love, and although it scared him because he was just beginning to heal from the loss of his mother, it also excited him in a way he had never experienced before. It was as if God were answering his mother's prayer, though he still wasn't sure he fully believed it. One rainy afternoon in October, Michael arrived at the square with 2 umbrellas under his arm. The sky was gray and threatening a storm, but he knew Michaela would be there anyway. She never missed, not even when the weather wasn't ideal. And sure enough, there she was under the tree that no longer offered much protection, her guitar wrapped in a plastic bag to protect it. "I knew you'd come," Michaela said when she saw him arrive. "Of course I came," Michael replied, opening one of the umbrellas over her. "I wasn't going to let you sing in the rain alone." He sat next to her under the other umbrella, and Michaela began to play a melancholic melody that perfectly matched the sound of the raindrops hitting the fabric. There weren't many people in the square that day, just the 2 of them, and the constant murmur of the rain. "Michael," Michaela said after finishing the song, "I want to tell you something. I think it's fair that you know where I come from since you were honest with me." She carefully set her guitar aside and took a deep breath, as if preparing to open a door she had kept closed for a long time. 2 years ago, I lost my dad." Michaela began, her voice soft but firm. "He was a musician, played at church and at weddings, baptisms, any event where he was hired. He didn't make much money, but he loved music with all his being." A sad smile crossed her face. "Ever since I was a little girl, he taught me to play the guitar and told me I had a special gift, that God had given me a voice to bless many people. He always dreamed that I would be a famous singer, someone who would use her talent to honor God's name and bring hope to those who needed it most." Michael listened in silence, gripping the handle of the umbrella tightly. He suddenly got sick with a heart condition. In less than 3 months, he went from being a strong, cheerful man to being confined to a hospital bed. The medical bills left us with nothing. We sold the house, the instruments, everything except this guitar that he gave me for my 15th birthday. Michaela caressed the instrument tenderly. The day before he died, he took my hand and made me promise that I wouldn't give up music, that I would continue singing to glorify God, no matter the circumstances. So here I am, fulfilling that promise. Michael felt a lump in his throat. "That's why you sing on the street," he murmured, finally understanding. "Exactly," Michaela confirmed. "I could get a normal office job or work in a store, but every time I get on a stage, even if it's this humble square, I feel my dad is with me. I feel like I'm honoring his memory and fulfilling the purpose God has for my life." She wiped away a tear rolling down her cheek. "I know it's not glamorous. I know people look at me with pity sometimes, but when I see someone like you, someone who arrives broken and slowly begins to heal, thanks to these songs, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Michael extended his free hand and took Michaela's, intertwining his fingers with hers. "You're not just a street singer, Michaela. You are an instrument of God, just as your dad saw. And your voice saved me when I was drowning." The rain began to fall harder, but neither of them moved. They remained there under their umbrellas with their hands clasped and their hearts opening to each other in ways that words could not fully express. "Do you know what's most ironic?" Michael asked after a long silence. "My mom always prayed that I would find a wife who truly loved me, someone with a pure heart who would make me a better person. And now that I've lost her, now that I'm going through the darkest moment of my life, you appear." His voice trembled with emotion. "Michaela, I don't know if you believe in signs from God. I don't know if you believe that people meet for a reason, but I'm starting to believe that our meeting was no accident." Michaela looked at him with shining eyes, the rain creating a silver curtain around them. "I've always believed in that, Michael. From the first day I saw you crying on that bench, I felt in my heart that God had brought you to this square for a reason. I didn't know what it was, but I trusted that He had a plan." She moved a little closer to him, their faces now inches apart. "My dad used to say that God writes the best love stories, but that He first has to prepare the hearts. Maybe this is what He's doing with us." The confession hung in the air between them, charged with possibilities and unspoken promises. Michael knew in that instant that he was falling hopelessly in love with Michaela, and from the way she looked at him, he knew the feeling was mutual. Michael arrived at the square one Tuesday at 3 o'clock sharp, as he had every day for the past 6 weeks. There was something special about this Tuesday, because that morning he had made an important decision. He would ask Michaela to have dinner with him at a restaurant, a real date, not just casual encounters in the square or downtown BBQ joints. In the pocket of his pearl gray jacket, he carried a small box with a necklace he had bought, a simple silver chain with a music note pendant. It wasn't ostentatious. He knew Michaela didn't appreciate expensive things just for being expensive, but it was significant. It represented everything she had brought into his life: music, hope, reasons to smile again. Michael parked his SUV and walked towards the square with a racing heart, mentally rehearsing the words he would say. But when he reached the oak tree where she always sang, the bench was empty. There was no guitar, no open case with a few coins, none of the presents that had filled his afternoons with light. Michael frowned, puzzled. In 6 weeks, Michaela had never missed a single day, not even when it rained or was very hot. He sat on the bench where she usually sat, hoping that maybe she was just running late, that she would appear at any moment with that smile that made everything seem right. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. Michael took out his phone and realized they had never exchanged numbers. Their entire connection had been in person, in that sacred space of the square where words were often unnecessary. How had he not thought to ask for her number? He got up and began to walk around the square, wondering if perhaps she had changed spots that day. He checked every corner, every bench, but Michaela was nowhere to be found. A sense of unease began to grow in his chest, an inner voice telling him something was wrong. He approached a hot dog vendor who was always nearby and had seen Michaela sing many times. "Excuse me, sir. Have you seen the young woman who sings here? The one with the mustard dress and the guitar?" The man shook his head while spreading mustard on a hot dog. "Haven't seen her today, young man, and I've been here since 10 this morning." Michael thanked him and continued searching, increasingly worried. He walked to the small BBQ joint where they had eaten together, thinking he might find her there. The owner recognized him immediately. "Looking for Michaela?" the older man asked while cleaning a table. Michael nodded urgently. "She hasn't been around for 2 days," the owner informed him. "But Mrs. Lucia, who lives in the building next door, is a friend of hers. Maybe she knows something." He gave him the address, and Michael ran there without a second thought. He found Mrs. Lucia sweeping the entrance of a modest 3-story building. She was a woman in her 60s, with her hair in a bun and a floral apron. "Mrs. Lucia?" Michael asked, trying to catch his breath. "I'm looking for Michaela the singer. I was told you know her." The woman's expression immediately changed to one of concern. "Oh, son, it's good you're asking about her. She's in the city hospital. They admitted her the day before yesterday." Michael felt the floor move beneath his feet. "What happened to her?" he managed to articulate. The woman sighed sadly. "That girl so good and so stubborn. On Sunday there was a charity event at the neighborhood church, a collection to help some families who lost their homes in a fire. It rained all afternoon, but she was determined to sing to cheer people up and help the cause. She was there for more than 4 hours in the rain." Mrs. Lucia continued, shaking her head with worry. "We told her to go inside, that it was enough, but she wouldn't. She said God had given her that talent to serve others, and that a little water wasn't going to stop her." The woman wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. "On Monday, she woke up with a very high fever, coughing horribly. I called the ambulance myself because she was turning blue from coughing so much. The doctor said she has severe pneumonia." Michael felt short of breath. "Which hospital is she in? Can you give me the exact address?" The woman gave him all the details he needed, including the room number. Michael thanked her and ran to his SUV. As he drove to the city hospital, his hands trembled on the steering wheel. How was it possible that the person who had brought light into his life was now in a hospital bed? It was like a cruel repetition of what he had experienced with his mother, and fear paralyzed him. But this time would be different, he promised himself. This time, he would be on time. This time he would be there for her as she had been for him. He sped through the streets of Nashville, praying to a God he was just beginning to believe in again, to take care of Michaela. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video and comment, Faith and Hope. The city hospital was a large old building with long corridors that smelled of disinfectant and mosaic floors worn by years of use. Michael practically ran in asking at reception for Michaela. The nurse on duty directed him to the 3rd floor to the pulmonology ward. He took the stairs 2 at a time, too impatient to wait for the elevator. When he reached room 312, he paused for a moment in front of the closed door, trying to control his rapid breathing and the terror he felt. He pushed the door open gently, and what he saw broke his heart. Michaela was in bed, connected to an oxygen tank with a mask covering her nose and mouth. Her usually radiant skin looked pale, and there were deep, dark circles under her closed eyes. The dark hair she always wore so neatly was tangled on the pillow. Michael approached slowly, as if afraid of waking her, or that she would disappear if he made any sudden movements. He sat in the chair next to the bed, and took her hand, which was cold despite the blankets. "Michaela," he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. "Please, you have to get well. You can't leave me now. Not when I'm just starting to live again." Tears began to roll down his cheeks as he held the hand of the woman who had become his reason to believe in miracles. Michael didn't move from that chair for the next few hours. When night came, a nurse came in to check Michaela's vital signs and was surprised to see him there. "Are you family?" she asked as she adjusted the IV drip. I'm someone who loves her very much," Michael replied in a hoarse voice. The nurse, a middle-aged woman with a maternal expression, smiled at him with understanding. "Visiting hours ended an hour ago, but I can make an exception. It's clear she's important to you." She jotted something on the medical chart. "Her condition is delicate. The pneumonia has affected both lungs quite a bit. The doctors have her sedated so her body can rest and recover. But we need to wait and see how she responds to the antibiotics in the next 48 hours. Michael felt a chill. "It's serious." The nurse hesitated before answering. "Yes, it's serious, but she's young and strong. She has a good chance if there are no complications. The best thing you can do is talk to her even if it seems like she's not listening. Studies show that patients respond to the voices of their loved ones." She left the room, leaving Michael alone again with Michaela and the rhythmic sound of the machines monitoring her heart. Michael leaned back in the chair without letting go of Michaela's hand and began to speak to her in a low voice. He told her about his day, about how he had planned to invite her to dinner, about the necklace in his pocket that now seemed like a foolish dream. He told her how the last few months had been the best of his life, despite the pain of losing his mother, because she had appeared like an angel sent by God to remind him that it was worth going on. "You know, Michaela, when I met you, I was convinced that God had abandoned me," he confessed as he gently stroked her hand. "I was angry with him for taking my mom for leaving me alone. But you made me see that God hadn't abandoned me at all. He sent you with your songs and your smile and your coffee with cinnamon." He wiped away tears with the back of his free hand. "My mom always prayed that I would find someone special, someone with a pure heart who would truly love me. And I believe her prayers were answered, Michaela. I believe you are the answer to those prayers." His voice broke. "So you can't give up now. You have to fight. You have to come back because I need you." The hours passed slowly like molasses. Michael fell asleep in the uncomfortable chair around midnight, but woke up every time a nurse came in to check on Michaela. At dawn on Wednesday, he forced himself to go to the hospital cafeteria for coffee and something to eat, though the food tasted like cardboard. He called his assistant to cancel all his meetings for that week without giving detailed explanations. For the first time in his professional life, work was the last thing on his mind. He returned to the room with 2 coffees, one for himself, and another he left on the small table next to Michaela's bed, as if she might wake up at any moment and ask for one. From his pants pocket, he took out his phone and opened a music app. Searching for quiet Christian songs, he placed the phone near Michaela's pillow so she could hear the music, remembering how she had told him that music was the language God spoke. "If you can't sing now, at least listen," he murmured. Throughout that day, Michael stayed there talking to her, reading her passages of hope he found online, praying with clumsy words because he hadn't done it in years, but with a sincerity he had never felt before. On Thursday morning, as Michael was dozing in the chair after another uncomfortable night, he noticed something on the bedside table he hadn't seen before. It was a small notebook with worn covers, probably Michaela's belongings, that Mrs. Lucia or some neighbor had brought to the hospital. With curiosity and care, he picked it up and opened it. It was a notebook of song lyrics, all handwritten in Michaela's neat, round script. Some had musical notations, others just words. Michael began to read and realized that each song was a conversation with God, a testament of faith in the midst of difficulties. There was a song titled, "Even Though I Don't Understand," which spoke about trusting God even when life makes no sense. Another called, "You Hold Me," about finding strength in the divine presence during the darkest moments. Each page was a piece of Michaela's soul, and Michael read them all with tears in his eyes. He reached the last page of the notebook and found an unfinished song dated just a week ago. It was titled, "The Man in the Square," and with astonishment, Michael understood it was about him. "You came with pain searching for a reason, and God put in my voice the medicine for your heart," said the first verse. Michael closed the notebook with trembling hands and pressed it against his chest. Michaela had written a song about him, about their meeting, about how God had brought them together. It was confirmation that she felt the same way he did, that their connection hadn't been his imagination. "Michaela, my beautiful girl," he whispered, leaning close to her ear, even though the oxygen mask still covered her face. "I found your notebook. I read all your songs and they're incredible, but most of all I read the one you wrote about me." His voice trembled with emotion. "When you wake up, I want you to sing it to me completely. I want to hear how our story ends in that song, because I already know how I want it to end in real life." He leaned over and gently kissed her forehead. "I want it to end with you by my side, singing not just in squares, but on the biggest stages, sharing your gift with the whole world. I want to be the man who supports you, who takes care of you, who loves you, like my mom always prayed I would love someone." Michael placed the notebook back on the table and took Michaela's hand in his again. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since he was a child, he truly prayed not with memorized words, but with a completely open heart. He asked God to give him a second chance, not to take Michaela from him, now that he had finally found a reason to believe in love and in miracles. It was Friday morning when Michael noticed the first change. He was reading another of Michaela's songs from the notebook aloud, one titled, "Promises Kept," when he saw her fingers move slightly. At first he thought he had imagined it, that the lack of sleep was playing tricks on him, but then he saw it again, a small but definite movement in her right hand. "Michaela," he called softly, leaning towards her. "Can you hear me? If you can hear me, squeeze my hand." For several seconds, nothing happened, and Michael began to think it was just an involuntary spasm, but then he felt a weak pressure against his palm. It was barely perceptible, but it was there. Michael's heart began to pound as he pressed the call button for the nurse. "She's responding," he exclaimed when the woman ran in. "She moved her fingers and squeezed my hand." The nurse quickly checked the monitors, and a smile appeared on her face. "Her vital signs are improving. Her fever has dropped considerably in the last few hours. I'm going to call the doctor." Michael felt his legs tremble with relief and had to sit down before he fell. The doctor arrived minutes later, a man in his 50s with glasses and a pristine white coat. He examined Michaela carefully, looked at the monitors, and checked her eyes with a small flashlight. "The antibiotics are working," he finally announced. "The infection is receding. If she continues to improve like this, we could start reducing the sedation this afternoon." Michael wanted to hug the doctor to shout with happiness, but he restrained himself and simply thanked him with an emotional voice. When they were alone again, Michael took both of Michaela's hands in his and began to cry. but this time they were tears of gratitude, not fear. "You did it," he whispered. "I knew you were strong. I knew you would come back." He spent the rest of the morning sitting by her side, watching every small movement, every flicker under her closed eyelids, every change in her breathing. Mrs. Lucia arrived around noon, bringing homemade food for Michael, who hadn't eaten anything decent in 3 days. "Oh, son, you look terrible," the woman commented with motherly concern as she handed him a container of chicken and rice. "You have to take care of yourself, too. It's no use for Michaela to get better if you get sick." Michael ate gratefully, while the woman told him that everyone in the neighborhood was praying for Michaela, that the church had organized a special prayer chain for her. In the afternoon, just as the doctor had promised, they began to reduce the drugs that kept Michaela sedated. "The process is gradual," the nurse explained as she adjusted the dose in the IV. "It might take a few hours before she fully wakes up, and when she does, she'll likely be confused. It's normal." Michael nodded mentally, preparing for that moment. He got up from the chair for the first time in hours to stretch his legs, and when he returned to his place, he noticed Michaela's eyelids were fluttering more frequently. Her breathing had also changed. It was less deep, more conscious. Michael took her hand and began to speak to her softly. "Michaela, it's me." "Michael, you're in the hospital, but you're okay. You're recovering. Don't be scared when you open your eyes. I'm here with you and I'm not going anywhere." He continued talking to her for the next hour, telling her stories about his life, about his mother, about how he had learned to pray again because of her. And then, as the sun began to set outside the hospital window, Michaela slowly opened her eyes. Her gaze was unfocused, at first blinking against the light of the room. But when her eyes finally met Michael's, something in her expression changed. "Michael," she murmured in a hoarse voice from behind the oxygen mask. Her name was barely a whisper. He felt his heart explode with happiness. "Yes, it's me. I'm here," he replied gently, squeezing her hand. A nurse who had been monitoring from the doorway quickly came in to check her vital signs. "Welcome back, Miss Michaela," she said with a smile as she noted her stats. "Do you know where you are?" Michaela nodded weakly. "Hospital," she managed to say. "What happened?" Her voice sounded tired and confused. The nurse briefly explained about the pneumonia, about the 3 days she had been sedated, about her recovery. Michaela listened with wide eyes, processing the information slowly. When the nurse finished and left the room, promising to return soon with the doctor, Michaela turned her gaze back to Michael. "You look terrible," she said with an attempted smile that made Michael laugh through his tears. "You look beautiful," he replied sincerely. "You scared me so much I came to the square on Tuesday, and you weren't there. I thought I was going to go crazy looking for you." Michaela closed her eyes for a moment, as if the effort of keeping them open was too much. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "The church, the event. I had to help." Michael shook his head gently. "You don't have to apologize for having such a big heart, but you do have to promise me you'll take better care of yourself." He took the song notebook he had been reading all those days from his pocket. "I found this on your bedside table. I hope you don't mind, but I read it. I read every song, every word." Michaela's eyes welled up. "I especially read one called The Man in the Square." Michael continued in an emotional voice. "The song about me, about us, about how God found us in the midst of our pain." He leaned closer to her, their faces now inches apart. "Michaela, these days, sitting here, not knowing if you were going to wake up, made me realize something. I don't want to spend another day of my life without you. I don't want you to keep singing alone in that square. I want to be by your side, supporting you, taking care of you, loving you, just like I know my mom wanted me to love someone." A tear rolled down Michaela's cheek, and Michael gently wiped it away. "When you fully recover, when you get out of here, I want you to give me the chance to show you that what we feel is not a coincidence. It's a gift from God, and I'm not going to waste it." Michaela nodded slowly, her lips forming the words she didn't have the strength to say aloud. But Michael understood them anyway. "I love you too." In that hospital room, under the golden light of the sunset, two souls that had been broken found the promise of healing in each other's eyes. The next 2 weeks were a slow but steady recovery for Michaela. Michael was by her side every day, arriving early in the morning and staying until the nurses forced him to leave at night. He brought her fresh flowers every couple of days. Nothing ostentatious, just daisies and sunflowers he bought at the market because he knew she preferred simplicity. He read her songs from her notebook. They talked about their dreams and fears, and slowly Michaela's voice regained its strength. One afternoon, after the oxygen mask had been removed, and she could breathe on her own, she asked him to bring her guitar. "You're still weak," Michael objected with concern. "It's not good for you to exert yourself too much." But Michaela insisted with that quiet determination that characterized her. "Music is part of my healing, Michael. I need to sing even just a little." The next day, Michael brought the guitar from the small apartment where Michaela lived, a humble but clean place on the second floor of an old building. When he handed it to her, her eyes shone with a joy he hadn't seen since before she was hospitalized. Michaela carefully tuned the strings, her fingers remembering the familiar movements, and began to softly play a melody Michael didn't recognize. It was the song about him, the man in the square. But now, it was complete. Michaela sang with a voice still a little weak, but full of emotion, telling the story of how a man had come into her life, shattered by grief, and how God had used her music to heal his heart. But the song didn't end there. The last verses spoke of how that same man had become her own healing, her reason to believe that God fulfills his promises in unexpected ways. "You came seeking comfort and found a willing heart, but I was lost too until God placed you in my life." Michaela sang as tears rolled down Michael's cheeks. When she finished the song, he couldn't hold back any longer. He got up from his chair and knelt by the hospital bed, taking Michaela's hands, the guitar still between them. "Marry me," he said, unplanned, the words coming straight from his heart. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other for 2 months, but I also know I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You are the answer to my mother's prayers, and I want to spend the rest of my life honoring this gift God has given me." Michaela looked at him with wide eyes, surprised and emotional. "Michael," she whispered carefully, setting the guitar aside. "I didn't expect this to happen so quickly either. When I first saw you in that square, I just wanted to help you heal a little. I never imagined you would become the most important person in my life." She took Michael's face in her hands. "But you're right. This isn't a coincidence. Every time I pray, I feel God confirming that you are part of his plan for me, just as I am part of his plan for you." A radiant smile lit up her pale face. "Yes, Michael. Yes, I want to marry you. I want to build a life together. I want to keep singing, but now with someone by my side who supports me. I want to honor the memory of my dad and your mom by living the love they dreamed of for us." Michael stood up and hugged her carefully, not wanting to hurt her, feeling his heart was so full it might burst. They stayed like that for long minutes, embraced in that hospital room that had witnessed so much fear and was now filled with hope and promises of a future. A nurse passing by in the hallway peeked in, saw the scene and smiled before discreetly closing the door to give them privacy. Michaela was discharged from the hospital a week later. The doctor gave her strict instructions to rest no singing on the street for at least a month and treatment with inhalers to strengthen her lungs. Michael insisted she stay at his house during her recovery, a spacious and comfortable residence in a quiet area of Nashville. At first, Michaela resisted. She didn't want to be a burden. But Michael explained that the house had plenty of spare rooms and that he would feel more at ease knowing she was well cared for. He hired a private nurse to check on Michaela twice a day and made sure she had everything she needed. During those weeks of living together, their relationship deepened in ways that hadn't been possible in the square. They cooked together, though Michael shamefully admitted his culinary skills were limited, and Michaela laughed as she taught him to make tortillas by hand. They watched movies in the afternoons, talked late into the night about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Michael told her about the pressure of running a large business, about how he sometimes felt lonely, surrounded by people. Michaela told him about her difficult years after her father's death, about the nights she cried, wondering if she was truly fulfilling the dream he had for her, or just surviving. One Saturday afternoon, 2 months after Michaela left the hospital, Michael took her back to the square where they had met. She had insisted on going back that the place was special for both of them, and she needed to close that chapter before starting the next. They walked hand in hand to the oak tree, and Michaela sat on her usual bench with the guitar Michael carried for her. There were a few people in the square, and when she began to sing, her voice sounded stronger and clearer than ever, as if the illness had been just a test that had made her more resilient. She sang several of her favorite songs, and Michael noticed how people stopped to listen, leaving not just coins, but bills in the open case. But this time was different. Michaela wasn't singing out of necessity, but for the love of her art to fulfill the promise made to her father to share the gift God had given her. When her little impromptu concert ended, Michael knelt before her once more, but this time he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a simple silver ring with a small but significant stone. "I know you already said yes," Michael began, as the people around started to realize what was happening. "But I wanted to make it official here in the place where it all began. Michaela, will you do me the honor of being my wife?" The entire square erupted in applause as she, with tears of happiness streaming down her cheeks, said yes again. Michael placed the ring on her finger and knew that his mother from somewhere in heaven was smiling, seeing that her prayers had finally been answered. Michael and Michaela decided their wedding would be simple but meaningful. No unnecessary luxuries or lavish parties. They wanted something intimate that truly reflected who they were as a couple. They chose a small garden on the outskirts of Nashville, a quiet place surrounded by wildflowers and leafy trees that reminded them of the square where they had met. The date was set for a Saturday in April. 4 months after that day, Michael had first heard Michaela sing. During those months of preparation, their love only grew stronger. Michael discovered that sharing his life with someone was infinitely better than all the business meetings and million-dollar contracts in the world. Michaela, for her part, found in Michael not just a partner, but someone who genuinely believed in her talent and wanted to help her fulfill her father's dream. The morning of the wedding dawned perfect, with a clear blue sky and a gentle breeze that swayed the flowers in the garden. Michael dressed in a simple beige suit. Nothing flashy, just elegant and appropriate for the occasion. He looked in the mirror as he adjusted his tie, and for a moment closed his eyes, imagining his mother was there with him. Mom, I did it, he whispered to the air. I found someone special just like you prayed for. I wish you could meet her. I know you would love her as much as I do. He felt a deep peace in his heart, as if his mother could really hear him from somewhere. His best friend from college, who would be his witness, entered the room. It's time, brother. Your bride is waiting. Michael nodded, took a deep breath, and walked out to the garden where the guests were already gathered. They had invited only the closest people, some of Michael's friends' neighbors from Michaela's neighborhood. Mrs. Lucia, who had been like a second mother to her, the owner of the BBQ joint, and some fellow church members who had prayed for her recovery. There were no more than 30 people, but each one was there out of genuine love, not social obligation. Michael took his place under an arch decorated with white and yellow flowers, his heart pounding as he waited. The music began to play. It wasn't a traditional wedding march, but a soft melody played on an acoustic guitar by a musician friend of Michaela's. And then she appeared at the end of the makeshift aisle between the chairs, and Michael felt the air leave his lungs. Michaela wore a simple ivory-colored dress that flowed with the breeze with no elaborate veil or excessive accessories. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders with a few small flowers intertwined, and in her hands she carried a modest bouquet of daisies. But what shone brightest was her smile, the smile that had captivated Michael from the first day. She walked alone down the aisle with no one to give her away, because, as she had explained, no one could give her away except God Himself, who had brought them together. When she reached Michael, he took her hands and had to blink several times to hold back tears. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You too," she replied with a mischievous smile. The pastor, an older man from the neighborhood church, began the ceremony with simple words about enduring love, about how God unites two people to be stronger together than apart. He spoke about the trials they had faced together in such a short time, and how that was evidence that their love was genuine. Then came the vows. Michael had written his by hand and pulled them from his pocket with trembling hands. "Michaela, when I met you, I was lost in the deepest darkness I had ever known. Your voice was the light that guided me back to life. I promise to be by your side in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, as you were for me when I needed it most. I promise to support your dreams as if they were my own, because your happiness is now my happiness. And I promise to honor every day the gift God gave me by putting you in my path." His voice broke at the end, but he managed to finish. Michaela smiled with tear-filled eyes and began her own vows. "Michael, you came into my life when I also needed to remember why I kept singing. You taught me that serving others doesn't mean forgetting yourself, that accepting help isn't weakness, but courage. I promise to love you with all my heart, to support you in your challenges, and to build with you a life that honors God and the people we love, who are no longer with us, but who I know are watching over us from heaven." They exchanged rings with trembling hands, and when the pastor pronounced the words that declared them husband and wife, Michael took Michaela's face in his hands and kissed her gently as the guests applauded with joy. In that simple garden full of love, 2 stories of pain were transformed into 1 story of hope. The first few months of marriage were an adjustment, but also of immense happiness. Michael and Michaela moved into a smaller, cozier house than the large residence where he had lived before. They wanted something that felt like a real home, not an elegant office. Michaela started singing again, but now not only in the square, but in churches and community events throughout the city. Her story of recovery and faith began to be shared in congregations, and more people invited her to minister through her music. Michael became her biggest supporter, handling the logistics, and ensuring she had everything she needed to focus on her gift. One day, 6 months after the wedding, they received a call that would change everything. It was the pastor of a large church in Mexico City who had heard about Michaela. "We've seen videos of your performances," the pastor explained over the phone. "Your testimony is powerful, and your voice is a gift from God. We would like to invite you to sing at our annual conference. People from all over the country will be there." Michaela looked at Michael with eyes full of uncertainty and excitement. He nodded firmly, squeezing her hand in a sign of support. That conference was just the beginning. More invitations followed from cities farther and farther away. A Christian producer contacted her, interested in recording her first album. Michael used his business skills not to pressure her, but to help her make wise decisions, ensuring that every opportunity was genuine and aligned with the purpose God had for her. 2 years after that afternoon in the square, where it had all begun, Michaela released her first album titled Promises Kept. The album was an unexpected success in the Christian music world, not because it was commercially perfect, but because each song carried an authentic piece of Michaela's heart. It included The Man in the Square, the song about Michael that thousands of people now sang in churches. The lyrics spoke of pain transformed into hope of loss, turned into purpose of how God can take the broken pieces of a life and create something beautiful. Michaela began to travel throughout Mexico, and then to other Latin American countries, sharing her music and her testimony. Michael accompanied her whenever he could, having delegated much of his company to trusted partners so he could be present in his wife's ministry. He discovered that his true calling was not just to build buildings, but to help build the dream God had placed in Michaela's heart. On one of their trips 3 years after they were married, they were in a hotel in Colombia preparing for a large concert when Michaela gave him news that left him speechless. "Michael, there's something I need to tell you," she began with a mysterious smile as they sat on the balcony watching the sunset. "For a few weeks I've been feeling different, tired but happy. I went to the doctor before this trip." She paused, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "We're going to have a baby." Michael looked at her, unable to believe what he was hearing, and then a laugh of pure happiness erupted from his chest. He hugged her carefully, as if she were the most fragile and precious thing in the world. "Really?" he asked again and again. "We're going to be parents." Michaela nodded against his chest, both of them crying with happiness. That night at the concert, Michaela shared the news with the audience. "5 years ago, I was singing in a square in Nashville, not knowing what the future held," she said from the stage in front of thousands of people. "A man came to that square with a broken heart, and God used my music to begin healing him. But what I didn't know is that he would also heal me. Today, that man is my husband, and we just found out we're going to be parents." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers of celebration. "I want you to understand something," Michaela continued. "God has a beautiful plan for each of you. Sometimes that plan comes wrapped in pain, in losses we don't understand, in moments where everything seems dark. But if we trust in Him, if we keep moving forward with faith, we will discover that every tear had a purpose, that every trial was just preparation for the blessings to come." She began to sing, "Promises Kept." And Michael from the side of the stage watched her with a heart so full of love he felt it might explode. His mother had been right to pray for a wife who would love and care for him. Michaela's father had been right to dream that his daughter would bless lives with her music. And God had answered both prayers in a way more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. In that moment, Michael and Michaela fully understood that their meeting in that square had not been a coincidence, but a divine design, a greater purpose that had united them to honor God's name through their love, their music, and now their family. And so ends this story of how a song on the street stopped a millionaire and led him to the love of his life. Michael found in Michaela not only a wife, but his partner in purpose. Michaela fulfilled her father's dream of blessing the world with her music. Both honored the prayers of those who loved them and are no longer here. If this story touched your heart, give this video a like and tell me in the comments, do you believe in the encounters God prepares? Remember that He can take your deepest pain and turn it into your most powerful testimony. May God bless your life abundantly. May He light your path in dark moments, and may He allow you to recognize the angels He places in your path, disguised as ordinary people. Never forget that His promises are always kept at the perfect time. See you in the next one.